Hello, everyone! You might be wondering how astronauts return from the moon. Or, looking forward, how they might return from Mars someday. First, let's clarify that humans haven't yet set foot on Mars. Sending people there would require much more advanced technology than a lunar mission. However, between 1969 and 1972, the United States successfully landed astronauts on the moon and brought them back safely 6 times in the Apollo program. Those missions were Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. A total of 12 astronauts walked on the moon's surface, and their footprints remain there to this day. Before we get into the specifics of how astronauts return from the moon, let's recap how they got there in the first place, with the Apollo spacecraft and the mighty Saturn V rocket. To carry out the Apollo missions, NASA developed the Apollo spacecraft and the Saturn V rocket. This massive rocket was powerful enough to propel Apollo to the moon. Saturn V was enormous, standing about as tall as a 36-story building, weighing approximately 3,000 tons, and built with 3 stages. Stage 1 was the largest and most powerful stage. It generated about 3,500 tons of thrust from 2,000 to 100 tons of fuel. In about 2.5 minutes, this stage lifted the rocket to an altitude of about 61 kilometers before running out of fuel and falling back into the Atlantic Ocean. Stage 2 took over next, burning through its fuel in 6 minutes to reach a height of around 185 kilometers, after which it detached and fell back to Earth. Stage 3, the final stage, placed the Apollo spacecraft in orbit around Earth and later propelled it out of orbit toward the moon. After completing its job, this last stage was jettisoned, leaving the Apollo spacecraft to continue its journey. The Apollo spacecraft was made up of 2 main parts. The Command and Service Module CSM. This module was the home and workspace for the astronauts throughout their mission. It included the Command Module CM for crew control and habitation and the Service Module SM for engines and essential systems. The Lunar Module LM. This module, designed for the moon landing itself, separated from the CSM upon reaching lunar orbit. It carried 2 of the 3 astronauts down to the lunar surface. The LM had 2 stages, the descent stage, used for landing, and the ascent stage, used for lifting the astronauts back into lunar orbit. The journey to the moon. After Saturn V boosted the Apollo spacecraft out of Earth's orbit, Apollo spent about 3 days traveling to the moon. Once there, Apollo slowed down to enter lunar orbit, circling the moon at about 110 kilometers above the surface. Landing on the moon, once stable in lunar orbit, to astronauts transferred from the CSM to the LM. Meanwhile, the 3rd astronaut remained in the CSM to maintain its orbit. The LM then initiated the descent, with its descent stage engine firing to control speed and guide it safely to the moon's surface. On the surface, astronauts performed their tasks. They collected rock samples, set up scientific equipment, and took photos for research. When the mission was complete, the two astronauts re-entered the LM. At this point, the descent stage served as a launch pad for the ascent stage, which used its own engine to lift the astronauts off the surface and back into lunar orbit. The LM was maneuvered to match the speed, altitude, and trajectory of the CSM. Then the two modules docked joined together. The return trip to Earth. Once back in the CSM with their lunar samples, the astronauts abandoned the ascent stage of the LM to reduce weight. The CSM then used its main engine to leave the moon's orbit and head back to Earth. As Apollo neared Earth, the service module separated from the command module, which then re-entered Earth's atmosphere at speeds of around 25,000 miles per hour, 40,000 kilometers per hour. During re-entry, air compression heated the command module up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,760 degrees Celsius. However, a specially designed heat shield protected the astronauts inside from this extreme temperature. When it reached the correct altitude, the command module deployed its parachutes, which slowed it down for a safe splashdown in the ocean, where recovery teams waited to retrieve the astronauts. Space toilets on the Apollo missions. One unique challenge Apollo astronauts faced was the lack of proper bathroom facilities. In those days, space toilets as we know them today didn't exist, so NASA developed some unconventional solutions. For urination, the astronauts used a special collection device resembling a plastic pouch with a nozzle to contain urine. For bowel movements, they had a plastic bag they would attach to themselves. Each bag came with tissue paper and a small bag of disinfectant. After use, the astronauts would seal the bag and mix in disinfectant to avoid contamination, then store it for the return journey. The first fully equipped space toilet on a U.S. spacecraft wouldn't appear until the Skylab space station in the 1970s. Fuel and efficiency in space. Returning from the moon required much less fuel than launching from Earth because the moon's gravity is weaker. It's only about 1/6 of Earth's gravity. In fact, the ascent stage of the LM weighed only about 4.8 tons, with fuel accounting for just 49%, or roughly to 0.4 tons. By comparison, the Saturn V rocket weighed nearly 3,000 tons, with over 90% of that weight being fuel. I hope this answer gives you a clearer picture of the incredible journey of the Apollo astronauts and how they managed to return safely from the moon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.